Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining me for this presentation on introducing tarot. I like to think of this presentation as containing some important information that will help you as you start your tarot journey. It's kind of like a prequel to your first tarot class. This information should help you manage your expectations regarding tarot, figure out exactly the path you want to take, and lower your learning curve. Before we get into the material, though, we will take a minute to talk about me. Yes, it's always good to know something about your teacher before you dive into something. So, about me. I am self-taught in terms of tarot, which I began in the 1990s and used all the information that was available at the time. The internet was not really a thing, so it was mostly books, but that worked out just fine. And I also was a member of the American Tarot Association, which I don't think they're really active anymore. I checked their website the other day and they haven't updated in a while. What is important about that is that I went through their certification process. Now, certification in tarot isn't that important of a thing. What was important was the educational process, and the way I taught myself tarot through that process has evolved into the way I teach tarot now. So it was a really pivotal experience for me. I later became the acquisitions editor at Llewellyn Worldwide, and I am in charge of their tarot and divination line. I'm also a sometime consultant for Lo Scarabeo. They are an Italian tarot deck publishing company. I'm also an author, a tarot deck creator, and a teacher. I'm very happy to be with you here today and introduce you to one of my favorite things in the world, and that is tarot. So what are we going to do here? We are going to focus on 3 important takeaways, plus at the end talk a little bit about readings and how tarot works. So the 3 takeaways for you. First, there is no one correct, absolute, pure, the one deck to rule them all. Number 2, the cards mean what we say they mean. Now, these 2 ideas might go contrary to what you came to tarot for. Many people come to tarot for certainty and for answers. And here it sounds like I'm going to tell you maybe there aren't any. Don't worry, though, because the 3rd takeaway is tarot's magic is in its structure. So while tarot may not give you certainty and absolute answers, although it can, it will give you so much more. And I'm really excited to tell you about that today. But first, let's talk about the idea that there is no one original correct tarot deck. This is important because many people starting tarot ask, what deck should I use? What's the right deck? What's the best deck? Well, the answer to that isn't as easy as you may think. So the way we're going to handle approaching this idea that there's no one correct tarot deck is to take a journey through tarot deck history. It's going to be a very selected history because of time, because tarot history is rich and deep, and you could write books and books on it, but we're not going to do that. We're going to take a very short trip down tarot deck history. We're going to start in the 15th century. This is because this is where we have our first written records of tarot decks. Orders for them, laws against them, things like that. It's also where we have our first tarot decks showing up. You should know, well, I can hear you saying, wait, you just said there was no original tarot deck. Well, if you want to be a purist and be like a whole complete deck, then no, there are no extant complete decks from this time period. Makes sense. They're delicate, fragile things to last so long. Plus, they were, well, I'll get to that in a minute. Let's look at some pictures. So here are some images from one of those decks from the 15th century. So for each of the decks we're going to look at 4 different cards. Oh, the same 4 cards for all the decks. And those cards are, the first one here is the Wheel of Fortune. Then we have Strength, sometimes called Fortitude or Force. the Queen of Swords, and the Nine of Cups. So let's take a look. What can we learn visually from looking at these cards? Well, we see that there are no words, no titles, no names, no numbers, nothing written on these cards. You'll also notice that there's an awful lot of gold leaf. These decks were owned by people who had money, who had wealth and the leisure time to use the cards. And it's important to note that what they used the cards for was to play games. Tarocchi is a trick-taking game, much like bridge, and it is still played all around the world today. So this deck, no names, no numbers, made for playing games and owned by a very few. Interesting note. These cards were often, hand-painted, obviously, commissioned to commemorate weddings and events. And the people giving the gift would have family members' portraits painted into the cards. So what a fun gift, huh? All right, so now we're going to move on to the 17th and 18th centuries. A few centuries later, the Marseille Tarot became popular. Let's take a look at some of those images. So again, we have the same 4 cards, and these might look a little familiar to you, more familiar than that other set probably, because people do use this deck today still. They use it for readings, but they also use it for its original intent, which was to play games. So that they have that in common with the Renaissance era decks, made for playing games. Now, there are some differences in these cards from the ones we saw earlier. You'll notice the addition of some numbers and some names on the cards. So that is already, we're seeing an evolution or a change or some differences from over time already coming into play. The Nine of Cups still looks very much like a playing card, doesn't it? Playing card that you might be familiar with, like the Nine of Diamonds or the Nine of Hearts. Well, here we have the Nine of Cups. Now we're going to head over to 1909, and this is kind of an exciting period. This is when the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot was published, and this is the most recognizable deck, especially in America. It's the most popular, the most commonly used deck. So we're going to talk about this one for a bit. But before that, we need to take a quick pit stop because a lot happened in between the 18th century and early 20th century. Now, no new decks really were created. Now, when I say no new decks, you know I'm simplifying. There were decks created, of course. What I mean is nothing significant that influenced the future and history of modern tarot. So basically, no new decks created. What was going on, though, was a lot of ideas and a lot of thinking and a lot of new knowledge. People were having the time and the access to materials to study like Hermeticism and Eastern ideas and Kabbalah and astrology, all kinds of things. And these ideas, I like to think, created a mulch, like just this fertile soil that lots of things could spring from. And one of the things that sprang from that is the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot. The Golden Dawn was one of the societies that was active at this time, and the creators of the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot, Arthur Waite, who was the author and designer, and Pamela Coleman Smith, who was the artist. They were both members of the Golden Dawn, so they came out of this tradition. So let's take a look at some of those images. And these might look very familiar to you if you've seen tarot cards in the media or in movies, or if your friends have them, you might have seen these. So here we have the same 4 cards as we've had, and you can see that they have numbers and names, much like the Marseille. But if you're paying attention, you might have noticed that this card is numbered 8. Now let's flip back to the Marseille. Look at that one is numbered 11. So all right, so do you get differences, evolution, changes over time? Things did not remain the same. You'll also notice that the Nine of Cups is not a playing card style design. It's a narrative illustration that tells a story. And this was a revolution in tarot. Very, very big and important change in tarot deck history. This deck was not created to play games. So again, another change in time. It was created to use for divination, and it was also created to hold this knowledge that the Golden Dawn was gathering and preparing and making conclusions about. So I can almost hear you guys saying, but Barbara, you said there was no original tarot deck. Maybe this is the one. It has all that knowledge built into it. We should just use that one. Well, maybe yes, maybe no. Here are some things to know about that. First of all, Arthur Waite took his vows of secrecy pretty seriously. And so it is surmised that he didn't put everything in this deck. Also, even further, that he obfuscated. He hid some things in this deck. And in fact, in the book that he wrote to go with this deck about, well, for example, the strength card that we have here that's numbered 8, he wrote something like, yeah, for reasons of my own, I switched the numbering, and you guys don't have to worry your pretty little head about it because it doesn't affect you. He didn't say it just like that, but that was the gist of it. So, in terms of being a purist, and does this have a pure, complete, logical system behind it? Perhaps it does, but it's been tweaked, I think. And also a thing to think about is the Golden Dawn ideas were based on astrology and Kabbalah. And when you look at all those meanings and compare them to the minor arcana cards, they don't always match up. So in that sense, it is not a pure and accurate deck that you can count on for that. But it is much more than that. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Okay, back to our timeline now. So we have the Thoth Tarot next. Now, the Thoth was created by Aleister Crowley and painted by Lady Frida Harris. They also were both members of the Golden Dawn and came out of that mulch and that rich tradition. And this deck was, even though they were members at that time, it wasn't really created till 1949, and it wasn't published till 1969. Let's take a look at some of these cards. Now, you'll notice some similarities and differences again. We have names, we have numbers. You'll notice, look at, Crowley calls it lust, but we all know it as strength, and he has numbered it 11. So we're back to the Marseille numbering. You'll also notice that there are keywords on the bottoms, which do not show up in the Ryder Waite. Also, an important difference is, look again at this Nine of Cups. Again, it looks like a playing card, doesn't it? So it kind of reverted back to that old style. It's said that Crowley didn't really care that much about his vows of secrecy and just told everybody everything. So we might be tempted to say, well, this deck has a unified, complete, whole system that would apply to everybody. Universal truth for everyone. Well, I'm afraid not. Well, maybe. It depends. It depends on what you believe, right? His deck has a lot of his personal religion in it, and it's pretty specific. It's pretty cool, but it's pretty specific. So if you don't buy into it, it's probably not going to be something you take on whole. Another thing too, remember I said the cards are really influenced, their meanings are influenced by the Kabbalah and astrology, kind of combined. It's a very complicated little system. Well, in looking at that, from what I understand of astrology and what I understand of Crowley's writings, he had some really bizarre prejudices against some of the planets. So definitely heavily biased. So these are some things to think about when you're thinking about this idea, I want the perfect deck, or what's the holy grail deck? What deck should I use? I hope this little jaunt through tarot deck history has helped you understand that you're still going to pick a deck, but it may not be based on the same criteria as you thought before if you were thinking, well, I just want the original true pure deck. So there is no one deck to rule us all, which is great because more variety. All right, now we're going to move into takeaway number 2. The cards mean what we say they mean. And yeah, so we're going to handle this in the same way that we handled the tarot decks. By that, I mean, we're going to take a little jaunt through history and look at interpretations. Now, it would be too much to do a bunch of cards. We're going to do one card through time. And because I like to let tarot kind of participate with me as much as possible, I randomly pulled a card for this part. And the card that was selected was the Six of Swords. So here are just a few versions of the Six of Swords to get us started. Of course, we have the Ryder Waite here, and we'll refer back to that one as we go through the interpretations. Okay, so we're going to start in the 1770s. Now, why are we going to start there when the deck started in the 15th century? Well, remember when I said the cards were used for playing games until the 1770s or thereabouts. So this is where we're going to start. And so we're going to just look at this first 100 years pretty quickly. So all the swords are bad except for the ace. 1880s, to take steps, to move forward, to do something. In the 1880s, envoy, messenger, voyage, and travel. Voyage and travel, that kind of goes with the to take steps, doesn't it? Well, I'm going to explain to you what I think happened with these. I think a lot of this the divinatory meanings that were used for decades and decades came from cartomancy, playing card reading. Now, even amongst playing card reading, there are so many different systems. There are some commonalities between them, just like with tarot, but there are a lot of differences too. But one of the common things that I think pulls over to tarot from cartomancy is in playing card reading, the spades and clubs, the black suits, are considered bad or negative or not helpful. And the spades became associated with swords in tarot. The correlation is not absolute and 100%, but it's close enough. And so that's where one of the ideas I think that influences the idea that all the swords are hard or negative or challenging. There is a reason they are, but it's not because they're associated with the spades from playing cards. So with playing cards, all the sixes were said to be a path of some sort or a journey or a route. And you can see that because visually you have these two columns of three spades and the path was seen to go between those two columns. So here we can see the early seeds of the idea that the Six of Swords has to do with a journey or movement. Now, interestingly, again, because we're talking about how things change over time, is the Seven of Spades or the Seven in any of the suits in playing card reading were considered a little bit of a problematic card because if you have the sixes being a path, then you have the seven, which has a spade right in the middle of the path. That's a roadblock or a speed bump. And which is interesting because modern tarot readers, when we do our numerology, we tend to think of sevens as holy or sacred or special or lucky, whereas in the very old cartomantic traditions, they were not necessarily that. So just another idea that divinatory meanings and numerical and symbolic associations have changed through time. Okay, so now we get to the Golden Dawn era, the end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s, and they liked a grand gesture and a lot of drama. They gave their cards titles. So the Six of Swords was known as the Lord of Earned Success. And so, yeah, there's this idea still of moving through something problematic, but it isn't a problem. And here is something to know. Remember, I said the Golden Dawn used the Kabbalah as part of the way they shaped their interpretations. Well, all the sixes were placed on a Sephiroth. You know what? That's not important. You don't need to know that. All you need to know is that the sixes in the Kabbalah, which influenced the Golden Dawn, are a sweet spot. They're a good place to be, balance and light and health. It's a good place to be. So even if you have something like the swords, which is supposed to be problematic, it's a sweet spot. Yes, it's something hard, but you were able to manage it. You did it. You accomplished it. You used your brain. Swords are often associated with thinking. So you used your brain and you accomplished something. Yay, it's all very exciting. Oh, then we move into the 1970s, which is about the 1960s, 1970s, when more mainstream people started writing about tarot and using tarot. And we're going to notice a difference, a shift here. The other interpretations are more concrete, they're brief, they're factual. There's very little connotation in the interpretations. As opposed to here, we have the idea that you're doing something hard and it's more about the hardness of the journey and not so much that you're going to come through it successfully. And an interesting thing that I really want to point out to you, this was pointed out in the 60s, 70s, and it has become a thing that almost all modern tarot readers will say. Looking at the images that Pamela Coleman Smith painted in such detail and reading them symbolically, this wasn't necessarily done before the 60s and 70s. So here, let's go back and take a quick look. Now look at the one with the person rowing the boat. That's the Rider-Waite-Smith image. Now you'll notice on the bottom part of that image, the water has waves in it. And on the other side of the boat, it's smooth sailing. Now, one might say, well, it's wavy because that pole that he's using to row the boat would be disturbing the water, and that's what's making the waves. Well, perhaps, but someone in the 60s or 70s noted that meant you were moving from troubled waters to a safe bay, a safe harbor. So a journey from a time of trouble to a time of safety. And more, when we go into the future with the interpretations, it's even less concrete and more, we'll say, judgment connotation on it. Also taking it up to a more abstract way of thinking, and more importantly, giving advice. You're not just telling somebody what's going on, you're telling them what to do and how to change. And this is huge. And it's an interesting development because, in the 60s and 70s, a psychological approach became really common. And the early writers, the Golden Dawn and early 20th century writers, when you look at those books, you'll see that the interpretations will usually include a short divinatory meaning or a list of key words, and then followed by several paragraphs talking about the greater or deeper lessons of the cards. And many times the two are completely disconnected. In fact, referring to Waite again, in his book, when he wrote about the card meanings, he would include some of the old cartomantic meanings, and he'd say what the Golden Dawn meaning was, and then he'd include these cartomantic divinatory meanings, and then he'd say, and these things cannot be reconciled. They're different, they can't be reconciled, and then he ends it there. Well, I think modern people want, or at least, I don't know if it's not because we're modern, but what we're looking for now in a divinatory system is something that makes sense, something where what we say the card means matches the picture and has some bearing in within some system, some unified whole. And that's what we're looking for. So I hope that little jaunt through interpretation history has helped you understand that, yes, the cards do mean what we say, and we've said from the beginning what they mean, and we keep changing what they mean. These changes usually reflect changes in our cultural and social understanding. I like to think they represent an evolution in human consciousness. And another thing, I was looking at the authors, and there is a shift from the early 20th century, mostly male authors, and then 60s and 70s on, mostly female authors. I haven't done a lot of study on that, but somebody should. Very rich ground for investigation there, to see how tarot changes to reflect our beliefs. Now finally, takeaway number 3, tarot's magic is its structure. And now we finally get to actually talk about the cards in a little more detail. So here you get to see the whole deck in all its glory. And this is the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. And we're going to be talking about this deck from here on out, even though it is not pure and perfect as Waite created it. Why do I get so excited about using this deck today? Well, I think it's because when you have something, an idea, a practice, a ritual, a belief, and people contribute to it, people work with it, people use it, people participate in it, it gains strength, it gains life. And I like to think that every person who shuffles the cards, who flips one over, who interprets a meaning, contributes to the growth and life and evolution of this deck in particular. It's not the only deck. Lots of other decks exist and are worthy and wonderful, but this is a really great place to start, as long as you understand you're not going to get exactly perfect, this means that, and everything makes sense, because it doesn't. Remember the first 2 takeaways. You've got to be comfortable with some ambiguity if you're going to tread these mystical waters. It wasn't the easiest thing for me either. Hopefully you guys will enjoy it, though. It gets fun once you get used to it. Okay, so all about the structure of tarot. Why is it so awesome? Well, here we have one of the ways we can divide the deck up. So we have on this side the major arcana cards, numbered 0 through 21. So there are 22 of them total. And they usually represent things in life that may be beyond our control, major milestones that happen within our life, big themes that are playing out in our life at that time. The other 56 cards we call the minor arcana. Oh, I think I forgot to tell you, major arcana, they're called that, and arcana is a word that means secrets. So the major arcana holds the big secrets. The minor arcana, it holds the little secrets. So the little secrets are divided into 4 suits. And these suits in the Rider-Waite are called wands, cups, swords, and pentacles. In other decks and other systems, they may have other names. You may see wands be called batons or rods. Swords can be called epées. Pentacles could be coins or discs. So each of these suits has an ace through 10. And I should say that each of the suits governs an area of human life. So wands are usually associated with projects, careers, passions, pursuits, things that you want, things that drive you, things that are, like that. Cups are usually considered to be emotions. I think of them more as relationship, but emotion, relationship, connection. Swords, we've already talked a little bit about the swords, and they can be problems, ways of thinking, the truth, the lack of truth, Yeah, things like that. Very sharp swords are. And pentacles. Pentacles have to do with your body, everything you own, your money, your investments, your time, your energy, anything that in the physical world. And so the Ace through 10 cards, they represent daily life, things that happen in your everyday life. Then we have the court cards, which in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck are the Page, Knight, Queen, and King. And they have other names and other kinds of decks and other traditions, like you may see King, Queen, Prince, and Princess, Mother, Father, Son, Daughter, things like that. And these represent the people. And so we have it's like we have the plot lines in the, or the themes in the major arcana, and then we have the basic plot in the numbered cards, and then we have the actors on the stage in the court cards. The court cards can be other people or could be aspects of yourself. So yeah, so the structure of the deck represents real life. So that's kind of magical. Now, another thing I want to say about the structure of the deck is one might be tempted, starting off, to learn meanings, specific meanings for individual cards right away. I would highly suggest that you hold off doing that, because it would be really easy to imprint a meaning of a card in your consciousness. And you don't want to do that too soon, because one of the most important things about tarot to understand, it's not just about what the card individually means. It also depends how the card relates to the other cards in the reading. I think the way tarot works reflects how life works. And I think this idea that the cards have a meaning, but they also have a meaning in terms of their relationship with other cards, is a key to the crux of human existence. And spend more time on that before you get into individual card interpretations. Okay, so I said lay out your cards and look at them and explore their relationships and connections with each other. And there are lots of ways to do it. You can do it randomly. You can do it in patterns. Now, this is a pattern that I really like to use, with the Fool on top and then 3 rows of 7. I like this because it reminds me of Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. This is something that we call the Fool's Journey. So when the Fool incarnates on this plane, they go through all the cards laid out here till they end up with the last one, the world, where they have accomplished their journey. So laying them out like this, you can look at it in terms of a hero's journey or a fool's journey, you know, like the refusal of the call, the journey, the return. You can look at them in terms of human life. The first row is childhood and socializing so that you can be a citizen in whatever culture you live in. The second row is the questioning of all those and finding your true self. And then the third row, spiritual revelation and insight. Lots of ways. Playing with the major arcana in these 3 rows is one of the most fun and illuminating activities I've ever done. I teach a class on it. If you're interested, let me know. We can talk. It's so fun. Now we're going to look at the minor arcanas and their relationships, laying the cards out in a row and with their court cards, and looking at how the energy moves through each suit can be really illuminating. In addition to the areas of life that I mentioned the suits are connected with, they're also associated with the alchemical or classical elements. And so in the Rider-Waite-Smith, wands are associated with fire. I say Rider-Waite-Smith is fire because some traditions, it is something different. Again, that idea, there is no one single way. So be aware, just because someone says something different doesn't mean they're wrong, just means they're doing it differently. Anyways, so you can look at how the energy of this element of fire plays out in different scenarios and progresses, and how it plays out in different personality types. And do that with all the suits. We're not going to talk about them all here. I'm just letting you enjoy the images and seeing how the energy flows through the suits as a whole. Now, another really great way to examine the cards and do this kind of not specific card meaning, but relational, like everything you can learn about the card from its relationship with other cards. So one really great way to do this, in addition to the suits, is to do it by the numbers. And if you want to make this varsity level, add the associated major. Now you're cooking, right? So this one's almost too easy, but it does let you know what you can expect going forward. So you can see the aces are all ones. They connect with the magician, who is also numbered 1, and you can see very easily how these themes might play out. Just give you a little taste of what that might be like. And now we're just going to look at the other numbers, not with their majors though, just their numbers, just so you can get an idea of what looking at them with their numbers might be like. Now, suppose we shouldn't have favorites, but I do. I like looking at them in their number connections better than their suit connection, but that's just me, and that's okay if you like to do it differently. Oh, yeah, the 4s. I want to talk about the 4s. This is a good teaching moment here. It's a very clear and easy one to talk about. So with the suits in tarot, we have lots of connections, associations, ways to describe them. One of them is in terms of being active or passive. So we consider the wands and swords to be the active suits. They're not more outgoing, they're active, they're external, they're expressive. The cups and pentacles, on the other hand, those are considered passive or reflective, receptive. So their energy is quieter, slower. So the number 4 is usually considered to be a space of stability, of something being, well, think of a square. It's very stable and it's still. So when you take an active element like fire, air, all going around, movement, activity, and put it in a 4, put it in a box where it can just settle and not be like everywhere, you get beauty and you get peace. The active suits are really, especially the swords don't have a lot of peaceful, good cards in them. You can see how lovely they go with the 4. Now, when you have a suit that's already kind of slow and takes its time and put it in a really slow environment, well, it's not going to be stable and secure, but it's going to tend towards stagnation. So, and you can definitely see that here with these 4 cards. So if someone's like, well, isn't 4 a good number? Well, you know what? It teaches you to remember things are not necessarily good and bad objectively, but they're good and bad, or perhaps even better, appropriate or inappropriate, depending on its relationship with the element. So yeah, we're not going to say, oh, well, okay, I take that back. People do say all the 5s are hard, and that might be the only one that's true. But most of the other ones, it's not necessarily the same with all the suits because they have different relationships with those numbers. So here we are going all through the 10s. So yeah, so that is the kind of the magic of tarot's relationship within itself and to itself. And now here's another benefit that tarot brings to us. Its structure helps us be more balanced human beings. So I know this is not actually how our brains look. But it's still a great metaphor, because even though we don't have our brain split into 2 parts, we do have systems in the brain that some light up when we're doing logical work and some light up when we're doing more intuitive or creative work. So even though this is not technically correct, symbolically, it works. So just go with it. So yeah, so we as human beings have a couple of ways of thinking, of processing, of approaching the world. And we do know that depending on where we were born and how we were raised, we may lean more one way than the other. So those of us who are born in a Western country, we are well aware that the emphasis and the value is on logic, rationality, science, that kind of thinking. And that tends to swing our pendulum in that direction. Now, for those of us who come to the esoteric arts and we're into divination and spiritualism and mystery, sometimes we dive all into that. And we're like, yeah, I'm so done with all that logic and rationality, too much of that. I'm burned out. I want this other stuff. And then we make the error of putting rational thought into shadow, which doesn't do us any good. And in fact, it really can hurt us because many times people feel like they were wounded from their culture and are trying to find balance, or not even balance. They're really just jumping in the deep end of this more intuitive, creative aspect of being and experiencing the world. They will say, oh, I want to develop this part of myself, but my brain, my thoughts keep getting in the way and they keep, distracting me. And I want to learn how to stop that, how to shut that up. And I would say, let's not do that, because I think that we are better when all of our parts are working at peak capacity and working together and supporting themselves. So instead of your brain fighting your intuition, how can they work together? Well, the tarot can help you with that. So how does it do that? So tarot cards have names, numbers, suits, and ranks on them. And all of these things, when you lay out a spread, they form patterns and connections, and they give your brain something to analyze and something to think about. They also create a great framework and structure to base the reading on. And then you have the images. The images, just like when we dream, and we dream in images, and it's a way that our subconscious communicates with our conscious mind. Similarly, the images on the tarot cards can work that way as well. And so when we have both of these aspects of ourselves firing at full capacity, working together, I like to think of it as creating an oracular moment. It's kind of like the image on this card, right? You have the, usually the solar energy, the rational side is the gold, and then the intuitive is the lunar side, the silver. And look at, they're coming together in this beautiful figure eight, this eternal balance of wisdom and knowledge. Awesome, right? I know, tarot is so cool. Let's talk about readings. Most people come to the cards because they want to do readings, and that's great. Readings are, one of the best things you can do with the tarot cards, although it is not the only thing you can do with them. And it's kind of where I got the title for this little workshop. It's an unbound book of possibilities. I like to think the tarot cards as an unbound book, 78 pages, shuffle them up, put them in any order. And it's like you're writing a book. So a tarot reading is kind of like a book or a short story or an essay that you write. Every time you ask a question, shuffle the cards, lay them out and interpret them. That act of interpreting is like the act of creation, right? Depending on how you think about it. But yeah, powerful stuff. And so a reading, what can a reading do for us? A reading can help us figure out where we are, because sometimes we just don't know. We feel lost, we're confused, whatever. And so tarot can help us figure out, where am I? And if you like where you are or don't like where you are, you might want to know how you got there. So you can either get there again or maybe never go there again. So you can figure out how you got to where you are. Then once you have a good sense of where you are in the world and in yourself, you can identify where you want to go and use the cards to figure out the best way to get there. Now, another thing that readings can do, maybe predict the future. Well, that's a fascinating question in and of itself. And that ties into the idea that there are things that each individual tarot reader decides for themselves. And whether the future can be predicted and to what extent it can be predicted, that is something every reader explores on their own. And finally, I did promise we would talk about how tarot works. This is a huge question with many answers. So I think you know from the little tarot history that we did earlier that tarot was invented to play games. So how does it work? Well, it works however we want to work it. I think it's important to remember that tarot was invented to play a game because I find there's kind of a trickster element to tarot all the time. It has a sly sense of humor. It's funny, it's witty, it's smart. And I think sometimes it likes to remind us that it started off as a game, and sometimes we take ourselves a little too seriously. But sometimes we're needing to be serious, and thinking about how tarot works might be one of those serious questions. And so there are lots of ways. The word divination, some people say the word divine is in it, and so it is a conversation between yourself and the divine. So that's one way to think of how tarot works. You're talking to a spiritual entity of some sort. Could be your intuition. You could be working with spirit guides. The most common one, as I mentioned earlier, is a psychological approach to the cards. So what is important to hear here is not an answer to the question, how does tarot work, but to realize that tarot is like a tool or like maybe even an artistic medium. Oh, I have a friend who describes the tarot as a machine that runs on mystery and produces revelation. How cool is that? So so how does tarot work? Tarot works in a lot of different ways, and I'm confident that you'll find the perfect way that tarot works for you, because it's very adaptable, very, very adaptable. Okay, so we're going to kind of bring this in for a landing here. So what next? So you've had a little introduction. I've told you some things. You have some kind of clarity about the tarot. What would I suggest that you do next? First and foremost, play with your cards. If you're going to take away anything, take away. Do not start imprinting specific meanings on your cards at this time. You are at such a sweet place right now. It's you and your cards. It's like a honeymoon phase. Just enjoy them. Enjoy playing with your cards. Track your journey. Keep a journal, however you want to keep it. I don't care how you do it. Just keep it. And then once you've filled it up, keep it. I have very few regrets in my life. One of them is I do not have my original tarot journals, nor do I have my original handwritten correspondence with the ATA when I went through that certification program. Could you imagine? Do not get rid of your old journals. You will regret it someday. And because when you go back and reread them, you'll be amazed at your beginner's mind and how smart you were, and you hadn't even started studying yet. Well, because that's the thing about tarot, right? I mean, it is the wisdom of it's wisdom, and it's within us. It helps bring it out of us. So pay attention to what you already know and go back in like 5 years and you'll be shocked. Finally, take your time and jump right in. Okay, sounds contradictory, doesn't it? Yes, by take your time, what I mean is, again, stay away from getting into specific meanings of the cards right away. Don't sign up for a bunch of classes. Don't read a bunch of books. Don't go online and watch a bunch of YouTubes. Take your time. Take this time for you to find out what your baseline, your base relationship with the cards. Establish that first, and establish that by jumping right in. Like I said, playing with the cards, even doing readings. You may not feel like you know what you're doing. It doesn't matter. Read about things that are not that important. Read about things that, if you're asking predictive things about the future, do things that would resolve themselves soon so you can start seeing how you're doing. Start small, but do it frequently. Play with them as much as you can. Make them part of your everyday life as much as you possibly can. and then worry about studying and taking a more systematic approach. Oh, let's take a quick minute to talk about the images used in this little show. The card images are from the Visconti, Ryder, Marseille, and Thoth. The teacher photo was taken by Dylan Novak. That was in 2019. Oh, I didn't even tell you about that. That was when I was in China, teaching in China, which was pretty fantastic. The other cards are from decks that I've either worked on or am working on with different artists. And then the non-card images, those are all from Pixabay, a royalty-free stock photo company. So I would like to thank you for spending this time with me. So until next time, happy tarot.